The plane sat on the tarmac, gleaming under the bright lights of the airport. It was one of those massive jets that could carry hundreds of passengers across oceans and continents. Inside, the first-class cabin was quiet, a world apart from the hustle and bustle of economy seating further back. Everything here felt luxurious: the soft leather seats, the warm lighting, and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Rachel adjusted her uniform as she walked down the narrow aisle, her heels clicking softly against the carpet. She had been working as a flight attendant for years, but tonight felt different. Maybe it was because this flight carried some high-profile passengers, or maybe it was just the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. Either way, she wasn't in the best mood. Her eyes scanned the cabin as she made her rounds. Most passengers were already settled into their seats, sipping champagne or scrolling through their phones. But there was one man who stood out immediately. He sat near the front, his large frame filling the spacious seat like it was made just for him. His dark skin contrasted sharply with the crisp white shirt he wore, and around his neck hung an extravagant gold necklace that caught the light every time he moved. The piece looked ancient, covered in intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story Rachel couldn't quite understand. She approached him cautiously, forcing a polite smile onto her face. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "Can I get you anything to drink?" The man looked up at her, his expression calm but unreadable. "Champagne would be great, thank you," he replied, his deep voice carrying a hint of amusement. Rachel nodded and turned away, grabbing a glass and filling it with bubbly liquid. As she handed it to him, her gaze lingered on the necklace again. It was impossible not to notice. So flashy, so over the top. Something about it irritated her, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Maybe it was the way it screamed wealth and arrogance, two things Rachel had grown tired of dealing with in her line of work. As she stepped back, she muttered under her breath, mostly to herself, "Some people really try too hard." She didn't think anyone heard her, but the man's sharp intake of breath told her otherwise. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Rachel saw something flicker in his gaze. Was it anger? Hurt? Whatever it was, it vanished almost instantly, replaced by a cool indifference. She quickly moved on to the next passenger, trying to shake off the awkwardness of the encounter. But the memory of that fleeting look stayed with her, gnawing at the edges of her mind. Who did this guy think he was anyway? Just because he could afford a ticket in first class didn't mean he had to flaunt his money like that. And that necklace, it was ridiculous. What was the point of wearing something so gaudy? Rachel tried to focus on her duties, refilling drinks and answering questions from other passengers. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about the man with the necklace. There was something about him that unsettled her, though she couldn't say exactly what. Maybe it was the confidence he exuded, the kind that came from knowing you were untouchable. Or maybe it was the fact that he hadn't said another word to her after their initial exchange, choosing instead to sip his champagne in silence while gazing out the window. The plane taxied down the runway and lifted off smoothly, climbing higher and higher into the night sky. Outside, the city lights grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, leaving only darkness below. Inside the cabin, the hum of the engines created a soothing rhythm, lulling some passengers into a light sleep. Rachel continued her rounds, making sure everyone was comfortable and attended to. When she passed by the man's seat again, she noticed he hadn't touched his food tray. The meal service had started, and most passengers were digging into their gourmet dishes, but his plate remained untouched. Rachel hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Is everything okay with your meal, sir?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. He glanced up at her, his expression still unreadable. "It's fine," he said simply, setting his glass down on the tray table. "I'm just not very hungry." Rachel nodded, unsure of what else to say. She lingered for a second longer than necessary, hoping he might offer some small talk or give her a chance to redeem herself after her earlier comment. But he didn't, and eventually she walked away, feeling more frustrated than ever. Back in the galley, Rachel leaned against the counter, letting out a sigh. Why did she always have to say things without thinking? It wasn't like her to be rude, especially to passengers. Her job depended on being friendly and accommodating no matter how difficult someone might be. And yet here she was, stuck serving champagne to a man who probably thought she was nothing more than a petty annoyance. "Hey, Rach," called out her coworker, Emily, popping her head into the galley. "You okay? You seem a little tense." "I'm fine," Rachel replied, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." Emily raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she grabbed a bottle of water and headed back out into the cabin. Rachel watched her go, envying her ability to stay calm and collected even during the busiest flights. If only she could do the same. As the hours ticked by, Rachel found herself stealing glances at the man whenever she thought he wasn't looking. Each time, he seemed completely absorbed in whatever he was doing, reading a book, checking his phone, staring out the window. He never once acknowledged her presence, which only added to her growing sense of unease. It wasn't until later, when she overheard him talking to another passenger, that she finally learned his name. "So, Marcus," the woman seated next to him said, leaning in eagerly. "What brings you to Europe this time?" Marcus. That was his name. Rachel repeated it silently to herself, rolling it over in her mind. It suited him somehow. Strong, confident, commanding respect without even trying. She listened intently as he responded, his voice low and steady. "I've got some business meetings lined up," he explained, his tone casual. "But honestly, I needed a break. Running a company doesn't leave much room for relaxation." Rachel froze mid-step, nearly dropping the tray she was holding. Business meetings? Company? This guy wasn't just some rich tourist flashing his wealth. He was someone important, someone powerful, and she had insulted him within minutes of meeting him. Her stomach churned as the realization sank in. No wonder he hadn't spoken to her since their initial interaction. He must think she was unprofessional, maybe even disrespectful. How could she have been so careless? She prided herself on being good at her job, on treating everyone equally regardless of status or background. Yet here she was, proving herself wrong in the worst possible way. Determined to make amends, Rachel decided to approach him again before the flight ended. She waited until the cabin grew quieter, most passengers either asleep or engrossed in movies on their screens. Then, taking a deep breath, she walked over to his seat. "Excuse me, Mr. Johnson," she began, using the name she'd heard earlier. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier. I realize now that I may have come across as judgmental, and that wasn't my intention." For a long moment, Marcus didn't respond. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable once again. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But remember this, you never know who you're dealing with. Sometimes appearances can be deceiving." Rachel swallowed hard, unsure of what to say next. Before she could respond, Marcus turned his attention back to his book, effectively dismissing her. She walked away, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Little did she know those words, "appearances can be deceiving," would soon take on a whole new meaning. Because as the flight continued onward, strange things began happening aboard the plane. Things that would challenge everything Rachel thought she knew about the world, and about the man sitting just a few rows away. The plane cruised smoothly through the night sky, its engines humming softly as it carried its passengers toward their destination. Rachel returned to her duties, trying to push the encounter with Marcus out of her mind. But his words lingered, echoing in her thoughts. Appearances can be deceiving. What had he meant by that? Was it just a casual remark, or was there something more behind it? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him, and maybe even to this flight, than met the eye. As she moved down the aisle, refilling water glasses and collecting empty trays, Rachel noticed something odd. The cabin lights seemed dimmer than usual, casting long shadows across the seats. At first, she thought it might be her imagination or a glitch in the lighting system. But when she glanced at the other flight attendants, none of them appeared concerned. They went about their tasks as if nothing was wrong. Rachel decided not to overthink it. After all, flights could be unpredictable. Turbulence, technical issues, and minor malfunctions were part of the job. Still, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Her instincts told her that something wasn't quite right. A short while later, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. It started small, a slight bump enough to make the drink carts rattle, but quickly escalated into something more severe. The aircraft shook violently, throwing passengers against their seatbelts. A few people screamed, and loose items tumbled from overhead compartments. Rachel grabbed onto a nearby seat to steady herself, her heart racing. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice over the intercom, calm but firm. "We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Rachel hurried to check on the passengers, making sure everyone was secure and unharmed. Most were gripping their armrests tightly, their faces pale with fear. Others clutched their phones or books, trying to distract themselves from the chaos around them. As she reached the front of the cabin, her eyes landed on Marcus. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on his lap, seemingly unfazed by the shaking plane. For a brief moment, their eyes met again. This time, there was no coldness in his gaze, just a strange intensity, as if he were waiting for something to happen. Before Rachel could process what she saw, the turbulence worsened. The plane lurched violently to one side, sending her stumbling into the nearest seat. Passengers cried out in panic, and the cabin filled with the sounds of crashing, objects and muffled sobs, and then, just as suddenly as it began, the turbulence stopped. The plane steadied itself, gliding smoothly once more. Rachel took a deep breath, her pulse slowly returning to normal. She straightened up, smoothing her uniform before turning to reassure the passengers. "It's okay now," she said, forcing a smile. "The worst is over. Just stay calm and keep your seatbelts fastened." But as she spoke, she noticed something strange. The overhead lights flickered faintly, casting an eerie glow across the cabin. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. The necklace Marcus wore was glowing. Not brightly, but enough to catch her attention. Its intricate carvings shimmered with a soft golden light, pulsing gently as though alive. Rachel blinked, convinced she must be seeing things. She rubbed her eyes and looked again, but the glow remained. It was real. For a split second, she considered saying something to Marcus, but she hesitated. What would she even say? That his jewelry was glowing? It sounded ridiculous even in her own head. Instead, she focused on calming the passengers, helping them collect their belongings and reassuring them that everything was under control. By the time she finished, the glow from the necklace had faded, leaving no trace of its earlier brilliance. Rachel tried to convince herself that it had been a trick of the light, a product of her stressed-out mind. But deep down, she knew better. Later, during a quieter moment, Rachel decided to confront Marcus. She approached his seat cautiously, unsure of how to broach the subject. "Excuse me, Mr. Johnson," she began, keeping her voice low so as not to draw attention. "I wanted to check if you're doing okay after the turbulence." Marcus looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm fine," he replied, his tone measured. "Thank you for asking." Rachel hesitated, debating whether or not to mention the glowing necklace. In the end, curiosity got the better of her. I don't know how to say this, but earlier, during the turbulence, I thought I saw your necklace glowing." To her surprise, Marcus didn't laugh or dismiss her claim. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, studying her carefully. "You saw that, huh?" he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Interesting. What does that mean?" Rachel asked, her heart pounding. "Is it normal?" Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. For the first time since they'd met, he looked tired, almost vulnerable. "It's complicated," he admitted. "But since you've noticed, I suppose I owe you an explanation." He gestured for her to sit in the empty seat beside him. Rachel hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. When she realized the coast was clear, she sank into the seat, bracing herself for whatever he was about to say. "That necklace," Marcus began, his voice low and serious, isn't just a piece of jewelry. It's, well, let's just say it's not from around here. Rachel frowned, confusion washing over her. What do you mean, not from around here? Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. It's an artifact, an ancient device created by a civilization far more advanced than ours. I acquired it recently, and I'm transporting it to a secure facility where it can be studied safely. But something happened during the turbulence. The necklace activated unexpectedly. Activated? Rachel repeated, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. You mean like magic? Marcus chuckled softly. Not exactly. Think of it more like technology we don't fully understand yet. The necklace has properties that allow it to manipulate energy, space, and time. When it activates, it can create disturbances. Rachel stared at him, unsure whether to believe him or think he'd lost his mind. Disturbances. Like what? Before Marcus could answer, the plane shuddered slightly, as if responding to his words. Rachel gripped the armrests of her seat, her nerves on edge. Is it happening again? She whispered. No, Marcus said quickly, shaking his head. At least not yet, but we need to be careful. If the necklace destabilizes further, it could pull us into, well, let's just say places we don't want to go. Rachel swallowed hard, her throat dry. Places like where? Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. Finally, he said, alternate dimensions, parallel realities, worlds that exist beyond our understanding. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. It sounded impossible, like something out of a science fiction movie. And yet, she couldn't deny the evidence. She'd seen the necklace glow with her own eyes. And the turbulence. It hadn't felt natural, not like any storm she'd encountered before. So what happens now? She asked finally, her voice trembling. Are we in danger? Marcus nodded grimly. Potentially. The necklace needs to be stabilized, or else it could cause serious problems not just for us, but for everyone on this plane. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure how to fix it. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. You mean we could all die because of some glowing necklace? It's more complicated than that, Marcus said, his tone apologetic. But yes, if we can't stabilize it, things could get very bad very quickly. Rachel sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. How had her evening gone from serving drinks in first class to facing the possibility of death or worse because of an alien artifact? It was surreal, almost too much to comprehend. After a long pause, Marcus spoke again, his voice softer this time. Look, I know this is a lot to take in, and I also know I haven't exactly made things easy between us. But if we're going to get through this, we'll need to work together. Can I count on you to help me? Rachel hesitated, torn between fear and responsibility. On one hand, she wanted nothing more than to walk away, pretend none of this was happening, and leave Marcus to deal with his glowing necklace on his own. On the other hand, she knew she couldn't abandon the passengers, or herself, to whatever dangers lay ahead. Finally, she nodded. Okay, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. I'll help, but you're going to have to explain everything to me along the way. Marcus smiled faintly, a look of relief crossing his face. Fair enough. Let's start with the basics. First, we need to figure out how to stabilize the necklace. It's reacting to some kind of energy imbalance, and until we correct that, it's going to keep causing problems. Rachel listened intently as Marcus explained the situation in more detail, using simple terms to describe the complex mechanics of the artifact. He showed her the symbols etched into the necklace, explaining that each one represented a different function or property. Together, they would need to decipher these symbols and find a way to recalibrate the device. As they worked, Rachel found herself growing more intrigued and more worried. The necklace was unlike anything she'd ever seen, its design both beautiful and unsettling. Every time she touched it, she felt a strange tingling sensation, as if it were alive and aware of her presence. Despite her fear, Rachel couldn't deny the thrill of being part of something so extraordinary. For years, she'd felt stuck in her routine, going through the motions without ever truly living. No. The plane continued its journey through the dark sky, the hum of the engines a constant reminder that they were still moving forward. Rachel tried to focus on her tasks, but her mind kept drifting back to Marcus and the glowing necklace. Every time she thought about it, a mix of fear and curiosity bubbled inside her. She had always believed in logic and science, things she could see, touch, or explain. But this was something else entirely, something beyond her understanding. As she walked down the aisle, checking on passengers and offering blankets, Rachel noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere. At first, they were small things, hardly noticeable unless you were paying close attention. The temperature in the cabin seemed to fluctuate, growing colder near the front and warmer toward the back. Shadows danced along the walls, even though the overhead lights hadn't dimmed. And then there were the whispers. At first, Rachel thought it was just her imagination. After all, flights could get noisy with conversations, movies playing on screens, and the occasional cry from a restless child. But these whispers were different. They didn't come from any specific direction. Instead, they seemed to float around her, faint and indistinct. When she turned her head to locate the source, the sound vanished, leaving only silence behind. Rachel shook her head, trying to convince herself it was nothing. Maybe she was overtired, her brain inventing sounds where none existed. Or maybe it was the stress of everything that had happened so far. Either way, she couldn't let it distract her. There were passengers to take care of, drinks to serve, and a mysterious artifact to deal with. She didn't have time for ghost stories. When she reached the galley, she found Emily stacking cups and chatting with another flight attendant. "Hey, Rach," Emily said brightly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Rachel forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Maybe I have," she joked, leaning against the counter. "This flight is starting to feel cursed." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Cursed? What are you talking about?" Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to share. Telling Emily about the glowing necklace and alternate dimensions would only make her sound crazy. Instead, she shrugged and changed the subject. "Never mind, just tired, I guess. How's everyone doing back here?" "Fine," Emily replied, handing her a fresh tray of snacks. "But I swear some of these people are acting weird. Like, really weird." "Weird how?" Rachel asked, suddenly alert. Emily frowned, glancing over her shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. "I don't know. It's hard to explain. Some of them seem off. Their eyes are glassy, like they're not fully awake. And they keep muttering under their breath, but when I ask if they need anything, they just smile and say no." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "Did you notice anyone in particular?" "Not really," Emily admitted. "It's more like a general vibe." "Why? Do you think something's wrong?" "I'm not sure," Rachel said slowly. "But I'll keep an eye out." With that, she grabbed the snack tray and headed back into the cabin. As she distributed cookies and pretzels, she studied the passengers carefully. At first glance, everything seemed normal. People ate their snacks, watched their movies, and chatted quietly with their neighbors. But the longer Rachel observed, the more she noticed the strange details Emily had mentioned. One man sat perfectly still, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His lips moved silently, forming words Rachel couldn't hear. A woman across the aisle stared blankly at her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen without touching it. Another passenger rocked gently in his seat, humming a tune that sounded both familiar and foreign at the same time. Rachel's heart began to race. These weren't random behaviors. They were signs of something bigger, something connected to the necklace. She glanced toward Marcus, who was now typing furiously on a tablet-like device strapped to his wrist. Whatever he was working on, it looked important and urgent. Deciding she needed answers, Rachel approached him again. "Marcus, she whispered, kneeling beside his seat. Something's happening. The passengers, they're acting strange. Marcus paused, looking up from his work. Strange how? They're distant, Rachel explained. Like they're not fully present. And there are these whispers. I can't figure out where they're coming from. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. The necklace is affecting them. Its energy is leaking into the environment, warping reality around us. If we don't stabilize it soon, the effects will spread. What kind of effects? Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hallucinations, memory lapses, shifts in perception, Marcus replied. Eventually, the boundaries between dimensions will blur completely. People might start seeing things, or beings, that shouldn't exist in our world. Rachel swallowed hard, her throat dry. And then what? Then the plane and everyone on it could be pulled into one of those alternate realities, Marcus said bluntly. Permanently. Rachel felt her knees go weak. She sank into the nearest seat, her mind racing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about preventing a catastrophe that could trap hundreds of innocent people in a nightmare they couldn't escape. So, what do we do? She asked finally, her voice trembling. Marcus held up the necklace, turning it over in his hands. We stabilize it. Easier said than done, of course. The symbols on the surface correspond to different functions. We need to recalibrate them to restore balance. And if we mess up? Rachel asked, dreading the answer. We don't want to find out, Marcus said simply. Which is why we need to move quickly. Together they began examining the necklace more closely. Marcus pointed out each symbol, explaining its purpose in simple terms. Some controlled energy output, while others regulated spatial alignment. One particularly intricate pattern appeared to anchor the device to its current dimension, a crucial function given their situation. Rachel listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Though she didn't fully understand the mechanics, she trusted Marcus's expertise. He seemed calm and focused, despite the gravity of the situation. For the first time since the turbulence, Rachel felt a flicker of hope. As they worked, Marcus handed her a small tool, a pen-sized device with a glowing tip. Use this to trace the symbols, he instructed. It'll help us activate the recalibration sequence. Rachel took the tool, her hands shaking slightly. She hesitated before touching the necklace, remembering the tingling sensation she'd felt earlier. But there was no time for fear now. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the tool against the first symbol. The effect was immediate. The necklace pulsed with light, brighter than before. The plane shuddered slightly as if responding to the change. Passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring softly. Rachel glanced at Marcus, panic rising in her chest. It's okay. He reassured her. That's supposed to happen. Keep going. Encouraged by his words, Rachel continued tracing the symbols, following Marcus's instructions step by step. Each activation brought a new reaction, from faint vibrations to bursts of color that filled the cabin. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening at times, but Rachel forced herself to concentrate. She reminded herself why she was doing this. Not just for herself, but for everyone on board. Finally, they reached the last symbol. Marcus placed a hand on Rachel's shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. This is the most important part, he said. If we get this right, we might stand a chance, but if we mess up, we won't mess up, Rachel interrupted, surprising even herself with her determination. Let's finish this. With steady hands, she traced the final symbol. The necklace erupted in a brilliant flash of light, blinding everyone in the cabin. Rachel shielded her eyes, bracing herself for the worst. The plane shook violently, throwing her backward into the seat. Passengers screamed, clutching their armrests as the aircraft lurched unpredictably. For a moment, it felt like the world was ending. Wind howled outside, though the windows showed nothing but swirling colors, reds, blues, greens, all blending together in a chaotic kaleidoscope. Gravity seemed to shift, pulling Rachel sideways and then upward as if the plane were tumbling through space. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. The plane steadied itself, gliding smoothly once more. The lights returned to normal, and the whispers faded into silence. Slowly, Rachel opened her eyes, blinking against the brightness. Around her, passengers stirred, looking confused but unharmed. Many glanced around the cabin, clearly disoriented. Others rubbed their temples as if waking from a dream. Rachel turned to Marcus, relief washing over her. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Marcus examined the necklace, his brow furrowed. "For now," he said cautiously. "But the energy levels are still unstable. We've bought ourselves some time, but we're not out of danger yet." Rachel nodded, exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had done everything she could, for now. But as she looked out the window, where the swirling colors had been replaced by the vast expanse of stars, she knew the fight was far from over. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it. After all, she had already proven that she was capable of more than she ever imagined. The plane was quiet again, but the calm felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice that could crack at any moment. Rachel sat in the nearest seat, her body tense despite the smooth ride. She glanced at Marcus, who was still examining the necklace, with intense focus. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the glowing symbols on its surface. It was clear that whatever they had done to stabilize it wasn't enough. It was only a temporary fix. Rachel leaned closer, lowering her voice so no one else could hear. "How long do we have?" she asked, her tone urgent. Marcus didn't look up immediately. He traced the edge of the necklace with his fingers, studying the faint pulses of light that emanated from it. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. "Not long. Maybe an hour. Maybe less. The energy is still leaking, and each pulse weakens the barrier between dimensions. If we don't find a permanent solution soon, the plane will break apart." Rachel's stomach tightened. "Break apart? What does that mean exactly?" "It means the fabric of space around us will collapse," Marcus explained. "The plane and everyone on it will be torn apart, scattered across realities, or worse, pulled entirely into another dimension." "Another dimension?" Rachel repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens then?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It depends on where we end up. Some dimensions are empty voids, others are filled with things we can't comprehend. None of them are safe for humans." Rachel swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. The idea of being trapped in some alien world, or worse, disappearing completely, was terrifying. But she couldn't let herself fall apart now. There were hundreds of lives at stake, including hers. "What can we do?" she asked, determination creeping into her voice. "There has to be something." Marcus nodded slowly. "There is one option. The necklace has a failsafe, a reset function that can restore stability, but activating it requires channeling massive amounts of energy. More than I can handle alone." Rachel frowned. "More than you can handle? What does that mean?" "It means someone else needs to help me," Marcus said, his expression grim. "And that person will have to take on part of the energy load. It's dangerous, possibly fatal." Rachel froze, her mind racing. She had signed up for this job expecting to serve drinks and hand out blankets, not risk her life to save humanity. But here she was, sitting next to a billionaire entrepreneur holding an alien artifact, discussing how to prevent interdimensional disaster. Life had a funny way of throwing curveballs. "I'll do it," she said finally, surprising even herself. Her voice wavered slightly, but her resolve was firm. Marcus looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Are you sure? This isn't a game, Rachel. If something goes wrong, there's no coming back." "I know," she replied, her heart pounding. "But if I don't try, we're all dead anyway. Besides," she paused, glancing at the passengers around them, "I owe it to them, to everyone." Marcus studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Okay, we'll do it together. But listen carefully. This isn't going to be easy. Once we start, we can't stop. You'll feel the energy pulling at you, trying to overwhelm you. Don't fight it. Let it flow through you, but stay focused. If you lose control, it could kill us both. Rachel nodded, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Got it. What do we need to do? Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a hybrid between a tablet and a remote control. He handed it to Rachel. This will guide you through the process. When I give the signal, press the button marked Sync. After that, follow the prompts on the screen. They'll show you which symbols to activate next. Rachel took the device, her fingers brushing against its cool surface. It hummed softly, almost like it was alive. She glanced at Marcus, who was already positioning himself in front of the necklace. His movements were deliberate, precise, as if every second counted. Ready? He asked, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. As ready as I'll ever be, Rachel replied, gripping the device tightly. Marcus gave her a small nod before turning his attention back to the necklace. He placed his hands on either side of it, closing his eyes as he began muttering under his breath. At first, the words sounded like gibberish, but as he continued, they formed a rhythmic chant that seemed to resonate throughout the cabin. The necklace responded immediately, glowing brighter with each syllable. Rachel watched in awe as the symbols on the necklace lit up one by one, casting intricate patterns of light across the walls. The whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around her like a storm. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, though none of them seemed fully aware of what was happening. Rachel forced herself to block out the distractions, focusing instead on the task ahead. Now! Marcus shouted suddenly, snapping her out of her thoughts. Rachel pressed the sync button without hesitation. The device vibrated in her hands, its screen lighting up with a series of glowing instructions. The first symbol appeared, a spiral pattern surrounded by jagged lines. Rachel touched it gently, feeling a surge of warmth shoot through her fingertips. The plane shuddered slightly, but she kept going, following the prompts as quickly as she could. Each activation brought a new wave of energy, stronger and more overwhelming than the last. Rachel's vision blurred and her head throbbed with a dull ache. She wanted to stop, to pull away, but Marcus's voice kept her grounded. You're doing great, he encouraged her, his own voice strained. Just a little more. Rachel gritted her teeth, pushing through the pain. The final symbol appeared on the screen, a complex web of interconnected lines that pulsed faintly. She hesitated for a split second, unsure if she had the strength to finish, but then she remembered the passengers, the families, the lives depending on her. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her palm against the symbol. The reaction was instantaneous. A blinding flash of light engulfed the cabin, followed by a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very air. Rachel screamed, her body convulsing as waves of energy coursed through her. She felt like she was being torn apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained but pure sensation. Through the chaos, she heard Marcus's voice calling her name. It was distant, muffled, but it anchored her somehow. She clung to it, using it as a lifeline to keep herself from slipping away. Slowly, the pain began to subside, replaced by a strange sense of weightlessness. The light dimmed, revealing the familiar interior of the plane. Rachel collapsed onto the floor, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Her limbs felt heavy, as if she'd run a marathon, and her head spun with exhaustion. But she was alive. That much, at least, was certain. Rachel! Marcus knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. Are you okay? She nodded weakly, unable to speak. Her body ached, but the worst of it was over. She glanced at the necklace, which now hung dormant around Marcus's neck. Its glow had faded, leaving behind only the intricate carvings that had once seemed so mysterious. It worked, Marcus said, relief washing over his features. The energy levels are stable. We're safe for now. Rachel managed a small smile, though her body still trembled with fatigue. Good, she whispered, her voice hoarse. That's good. Marcus helped her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed unsteadily. You did amazing, he said sincerely. I couldn't have done it without you. Rachel shook her head, leaning against the wall for support. Don't thank me yet. We're still flying through who knows where, and those whispers. Her voice trailed off as she noticed the passengers stirring around them. Many looked disoriented, rubbing their eyes or adjusting their seatbelts as if waking from a dream. Others stared blankly ahead, their expressions vacant. The atmosphere in the cabin was eerily quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the engines. "We need to land," Marcus said firmly. "The necklace may be stable, but this plane isn't equipped to handle dimensional travel. Every second we stay in this state increases the risk of another collapse." Rachel nodded, her mind clearing slightly as adrenaline kicked in. "Do you think the pilots know what's happening?" "They might," Marcus admitted. "But even if they don't, we can't rely on them to navigate us out of this. The controls may not respond properly while we're caught between dimensions." "So, what do we do?" Rachel asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "We can't just fly forever." Marcus hesitated, his brow furrowed in thought. "There's one option. The necklace has a homing feature. It can guide us back to our original dimension, but activating it will drain the remaining energy. Once we use it, the artifact will be useless." Rachel frowned. "Useless? Does that mean it'll stop working altogether?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "But if it gets us home safely, that's all that matters." Rachel nodded, understanding the stakes. "Then let's do it, before anything else goes wrong." Marcus reached for the necklace, his hand steady despite the gravity of the situation. He tapped a sequence of symbols, causing it to emit a faint blue glow. The plane tilted slightly as if responding to the command. Outside the windows, the swirling colors began to fade, replaced by the familiar expanse of clouds and sky. "Passengers," murmured softly, some pointing excitedly at the view. For the first time since the turbulence began, the cabin felt normal, or as close to normal as it could get under the circumstances. Rachel let out a shaky breath, allowing herself a moment of relief. But the moment was short-lived. As the plane leveled out, the plane rolled to a stop on the runway, its engines winding down as the passengers erupted into cheers and applause. For many of them, it was the end of a terrifying ordeal, a harrowing journey that had pushed them to the brink of fear and back again. But for Rachel, the relief was short-lived. She sat slumped in her seat, her body aching from exhaustion and her mind racing with unanswered questions. Marcus stood nearby, his face pale but resolute. The necklace hung loosely around his neck, its once brilliant glow now completely extinguished. It looked like nothing more than an ordinary piece of jewelry, yet Rachel knew better. That small object had nearly destroyed their reality, and might still hold untold dangers. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside her. His voice was soft, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the commanding tone he'd used earlier. Rachel nodded weakly, though she didn't feel okay. Not really. Her hands trembled as she brushed a strand of hair out of her face. "I'll survive," she murmured. "But what about the necklace? Is it done?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "For now, yes. The energy reserves are depleted, which means it's no longer active. But that doesn't mean it's harmless." He glanced at the artifact, his expression troubled. "We need to secure it properly before anything else happens." Rachel frowned. "Secure it? What does that mean?" "It means getting it to a facility where experts can study it safely," Marcus explained. "Right now it's unpredictable. Even without power, there's always a risk it could reactivate, or worse, attract attention from things we don't want to deal with." Rachel's stomach tightened at the thought. "Things? You mean aliens?" Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "Let's just say the universe is full of beings who would kill to get their hands on something like this. If word gets out that I have it, we're both in serious danger." Rachel stared at him, her mind struggling to process everything he was saying. Just hours ago, she'd been serving drinks and collecting trash in first class. Now she was sitting next to a man who carried alien artifacts and spoke casually about intergalactic threats. Life had taken a turn she never could have imagined. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the cabin. Passengers were beginning to disembark, some laughing nervously, others visibly shaken. Flight attendants moved up, and down the aisles, helping people gather their belongings and guiding them toward the exit. Rachel watched them go, feeling a strange mix of pride and guilt. These people had no idea how close they'd come to disaster, or how much effort had gone into saving them. "You should get off the plane," Marcus said quietly, interrupting her thoughts. "Go home, rest. You've done enough." Rachel shook, her head firmly. "No way. Not until I know this thing is locked away somewhere safe. Besides," she gestured toward the passengers filing out of the cabin. "What if something happens while everyone's leaving? Someone could get hurt." Marcus studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. But stay close to me. And whatever you do, don't touch the necklace again unless I tell you to." Rachel agreed, though part of her wondered why she was so determined to stick around. Maybe it was because she felt responsible. After all, she'd played a key role in stabilizing the artifact. Or maybe it was because deep down, she wanted answers. Whatever the reason, she wasn't ready to walk away just yet. Once the last passenger had disembarked, the flight crew began shutting down the plane. Rachel and Marcus stayed behind, waiting until the cabin was empty before making their move. Together, they gathered their belongings and headed toward the nearest exit. Outside, the cool night air hit Rachel like a wave, refreshing after the stifling tension inside the plane. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the tarmac. Airport staff milled about, taking statements from passengers and assessing the damage. Rachel kept her head down, avoiding eye contact as she followed Marcus toward a waiting car parked a short distance away. As they approached, a tall man stepped out of the vehicle. He wore a dark suit and sunglasses despite the late hour, and carried himself with an air of authority. Rachel instinctively slowed her pace, unsure whether to trust him. "Who's that?" she whispered to Marcus. "My assistant," Marcus replied calmly. "Don't worry, he's on our side." The man nodded curtly as they reached the car. "Sir," he said, addressing Marcus, "everything's ready. We can leave as soon as you're in." Marcus turned to Rachel. "Get in. We'll explain everything on the way." Rachel hesitated, glancing between Marcus and the stranger. Part of her wanted to protest, to demand answers right then and there. But exhaustion won out, and she climbed into the back seat without another word. Marcus joined her, while the assistant slid behind the wheel and started the engine. The car sped away from the airport, weaving through deserted streets bathed in the orange glow of streetlights. Rachel leaned against the window, watching the city blur past as her mind replayed the events of the night. Every detail, the glowing necklace, the whispers, the chaos aboard the plane, felt surreal, like fragments of a dream she couldn't quite shake. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "You deserve to know what's going on," he began, his voice low. "But first I need you to understand something. This isn't just about me or you. It's bigger than either of us." Rachel turned to look at him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "That necklace, it's not just an artifact, it's a key. A key to understanding the universe, to unlocking secrets that humans aren't ready for. There are forces out there, powerful forces, that want it for themselves. Forces that will stop at nothing to get it." Rachel's heart raced. "And you're protecting it?" "I'm trying," Marcus admitted. "But it's not easy. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and it won't be the last. That's why I created my organization, to safeguard humanity from threats like this." "Your organization?" Rachel repeated, her brow furrowing. "What kind of organization?" "One that deals with extraterrestrial technology and phenomena," Marcus explained. "We track artifacts, investigate anomalies, and prevent disasters before they happen. Most people don't even know we exist, and that's the way it has to stay." Rachel absorbed his words, her mind spinning. It sounded like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but after everything she'd seen tonight, she couldn't dismiss it outright. Still, one question lingered in her mind. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked finally. "I'm just a flight attendant. Why involve me?" Marcus smiled faintly. Because you proved yourself tonight. You faced your fears, trusted me when it mattered most, and helped save hundreds of lives. People like that are rare and valuable. Rachel felt a flicker of pride, though it was tempered by uncertainty. So, what happens now? Now, Marcus said, his tone serious, we take the necklace to a secure facility where it can be studied and contained. After that, well, that depends on you. On me? Rachel echoed, surprised. Marcus nodded. You've seen what's out there, Rachel. You've experienced it firsthand. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position within my organization. It's dangerous work, but it's also important. Humanity needs people like you, people who aren't afraid to step up when it matters most. Rachel stared at him, stunned. A few hours ago, she'd been dreading another routine flight. Now, she was being offered the chance to join a secret organization dedicated to protecting Earth from alien threats. It was insane, impossible, but somehow it made perfect sense. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to decide right now, Marcus assured her. Take some time to think about it, but remember this. The world is bigger and stranger than you ever imagined, and sometimes the choices we make define who we become. Rachel nodded slowly, her mind racing. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same. Whatever decision she made, she knew she couldn't go back to the way things were before. Not after tonight. The car pulled up to a nondescript building tucked away in an industrial district. Its windows were dark, its walls unmarked, giving no hint of what lay inside. Marcus's assistant got out first, scanning the area before opening the door for them. Rachel stepped out cautiously, her senses on high alert. This is it, Marcus said, leading the way toward the entrance. Once we're inside, you'll see exactly what we're dealing with. Rachel followed him, her heart pounding with anticipation, as the heavy door swung open, revealing a sleek, high-tech interior filled with monitors and equipment. She realized this was only the beginning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, because tonight she had discovered something about herself, something she never knew existed, courage. And courage, she realized, was the first step toward change. The inside of the building was nothing like Rachel had expected. Instead of dimly lit corridors and dusty equipment, she found herself in a sleek, futuristic facility that looked more like a scene from a science fiction movie than a secret headquarters. Bright lights illuminated every corner, reflecting off polished metal surfaces and high-tech screens. People moved about with purpose, their faces focused as they monitored data streams and operated advanced machinery. The hum of computers filled the air, blending seamlessly with the quiet efficiency of the team. Marcus led Rachel through the facility, explaining its purpose as they walked. This is where we analyze artifacts like the necklace, he said, gesturing to a large glass chamber in the center of the room. Every item we recover has the potential to teach us something new, or pose a threat. That's why containment is so important. Rachel nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the surroundings. She felt out of place in her flight attendant uniform, surrounded by people in lab coats and tactical gear. But despite her discomfort, she couldn't deny the sense of awe creeping over her. This wasn't just a job, it was a mission, one that carried immense responsibility. They stopped in front of the glass chamber, where technicians were already preparing to secure the necklace. Marcus handed it over carefully, his expression unreadable. As the artifact disappeared behind reinforced walls, Rachel felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Part of her wanted to ask what would happen next, but she held her tongue, knowing there were bigger questions to address. Now what? She asked finally, turning to Marcus. He sighed, running a hand over his face. Now, we wait. The team will run tests to determine whether the necklace still poses any risks. In the meantime, he paused, studying her closely. You need to decide if you want to be part of this. Rachel hesitated, her mind racing. On one hand, the idea of joining Marcus's organization was thrilling, a chance to step into a world far beyond anything she'd ever imagined. On the other hand, It was terrifying. What if she wasn't cut out for this kind of work? What if she made a mistake that put lives at risk? I don't know, she admitted softly. It's a lot to take in. Marcus nodded, his expression understanding. I get it. This isn't an easy decision. But remember, you've already proven yourself. You didn't hesitate when it mattered most. That says a lot about who you are. Rachel thought back to the events on the plane, the fear, the chaos, the split-second decisions that had saved them all. She hadn't considered herself brave before tonight, but now she realized she was capable of more than she'd ever given herself credit for. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe this was her chance to become someone new. What exactly would I be doing? She asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Marcus smiled faintly. Whatever needs to be done. Fieldwork, research, logistics. Our teams handle everything from retrieval operations to diplomatic negotiations. It's not glamorous, and it's definitely not safe. But it's meaningful. Every day, we're working to protect humanity from threats they don't even know exist. Rachel absorbed his words, weighing the pros and cons. The risks were undeniable, but so was the reward. If she said yes, she wouldn't just be a flight attendant anymore. She'd be part of something bigger, something that mattered. I'll do it, she said finally, surprising even herself with how firm her voice sounded. But I need training. I can't just jump into this blind. Marcus grinned, clearly, pleased with her decision. Of course. We'll start slow, ease you into the basics. You'll learn everything you need to know, and then some. Relief washed over Rachel, followed quickly by excitement. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, like she was stepping onto a path meant just for her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head-on. Over the next few days, Rachel dove into her training with determination. She spent hours studying alien technology, learning how to identify potential hazards and operate specialized equipment. The instructors were tough but fair, pushing her to her limits while ensuring she stayed safe. By the end of each session, she was exhausted but also exhilarated. Meanwhile, Marcus kept her updated on the necklace's status. Tests confirmed that its energy reserves were completely drained, rendering it inert for the time being. However, traces of residual energy suggested it could reactivate under certain conditions. To prevent that, the artifact was placed in a secure vault deep within the facility, guarded around the clock. As the weeks passed, Rachel began accompanying Marcus on smaller missions, observing how the team handled various situations. At first, she mostly stayed in the background taking notes and asking questions, but as her confidence grew, she started contributing more actively, offering insights and suggestions that earned her respect among her peers. One evening, after a particularly challenging assignment, Marcus pulled her aside. "You're doing great," he said, his tone warm. "Better than I expected, honestly." Rachel smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "Thanks. I still have a lot to learn, but I think I'm starting to get the hang of things." Marcus nodded. "You're adapting faster than most recruits. It's not easy, stepping into a world like this, but you've handled it well." Rachel glanced around the facility, watching her teammates work together seamlessly. Despite the dangers they faced daily, there was a sense of camaraderie that made the job feel less daunting. These people weren't just colleagues, they were family. "Never thought I'd end up here," she admitted, shaking her head. "A few months ago, I was just serving drinks and handing out blankets. Now, I'm helping save the world." Marcus chuckled softly. "Funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes all it takes is one moment, one choice, to change everything." Rachel nodded, thinking back to that fateful flight. If she hadn't muttered those careless words about Marcus's necklace, none of this would have happened. She might still be stuck in her old routine, dreaming of adventure without ever pursuing it. Instead, she was living it. As the days turned into weeks, Rachel continued to grow into her role, embracing the challenges and rewards that came with it. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was making a difference. And as she stood beside Marcus, watching the sun rise over the horizon, she realized something else. Courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was about stepping outside your comfort zone, trusting yourself to adapt and evolve. Tonight she had taken that step and she wasn't looking back. The journey was far from over, but Rachel was no longer afraid. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready to face it, with courage, determination, and a newfound sense of purpose.